During a heated primetime television interview aired live, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez launched a vicious personal attack on Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone, clearly expecting an easy victory. But Stallone, the iconic actor who portrayed Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, didn't back down. Instead, he responded with a brutal takedown that left AOC completely speechless. The exchange went viral within minutes, and now everyone's talking. The television studio was unusually tense that evening. Cameras tracked every movement. Producers whispered nervously through headsets. And across America, millions of viewers were glued to their screens. On the set of American Dialogue, CNN's newest primetime special featuring conversations between public figures with opposing viewpoints, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Red and blue lights illuminated the sleek black stage where two comfortable yet imposing chairs faced each other, separated by a small glass table. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez adjusted her microphone, a confident smile playing at her lips as she prepared for what she clearly thought would be an easy takedown of the aging action star. Her perfectly tailored red blazer stood out against the dark set, a deliberate choice designed to command attention. Across from her, Sylvester Stallone sat calmly, his weathered face unreadable, his powerful presence commanding attention even in the formal setting. He wore a simple navy suit, no tie, his collar open, the attire of a man who had nothing to prove. Tonight on American Dialogue, we bring together Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Hollywood icon Sylvester Stallone to discuss veterans' issues in America. The host began, her voice measured yet tinged with anticipation. Congresswoman, you've been quite vocal about Mr. Stallone's recent comments supporting veteran health care reform. Yes, and I think it's important to address the hypocrisy here, AOC began, her voice sharp with practiced indignation. Mr. Stallone has made millions, hundreds of millions, exploiting the image of American soldiers in his violent pro-war films like Rambo, glorifying military action while having never served himself. Stallone's expression remained unchanged as AOC continued her attack, though a subtle tightening around his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion quickly suppressed. He's part of the Hollywood machine that romanticizes war while real veterans suffer, she declared, gesturing dismissively towards Stallone. His films have actively encouraged a generation of young men to view combat as glamorous and heroic rather than the devastating reality it actually is. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a theatrical quality of moral outrage. And now he wants to lecture us about veteran care. This is a man who built his career profiting off the very military-industrial complex that creates these broken veterans in the first place. The same complex that sends poor and working-class Americans to fight wars that benefit the wealthy elite. Behind the cameras, veterans invited to the studio audience exchanged uncomfortable glances. One whispered to another, "Is she really going there with Stallone sitting right across from her?" "Just wait," his friend whispered back. "She has no idea what's coming." AOC, gaining momentum, continued her attack. Let's be clear about what's happening here. Mr. Stallone recently criticized progressive policy proposals for veteran care while promoting his own foundation. But where was this concern during the decades he spent glorifying violence? Where was this compassion when his films were pushing jingoistic propaganda that helped justify military interventions that destroyed countless lives? She turned directly to Stallone, her expression almost smug. Your films, especially the Rambo series, have contributed to a culture that glorifies war and violence, that dehumanizes our enemies, and that has directly fueled American militarism. The blood of veterans suffering today is partially on the hands of those who romanticize the conflicts that broke them. The studio fell silent. Even the host seemed taken aback by the directness of the attack. And let's talk about your so-called Veterans Foundation, AOC continued, her voice dripping with disdain. A convenient tax write-off that generates positive publicity while doing little to address the systemic issues facing veterans. It's celebrity activism at its worst. Superficial charity that masks the deeper injustices of the system that made you rich. She crossed her legs confidently, adding, "So before you criticize our progressive vision for veteran care reform, perhaps you should reflect on how your own work has contributed to veterans' suffering in the first place. How many young Americans joined the military after being inspired by your fictional heroism only to return home broken and abandoned by the system?" The studio remained deadly quiet. The host, sensing the tension, cleared her throat. "Those are strong accusations, Congresswoman. Mr. Stallone, Would you like to respond to these rather personal charges? All cameras zoomed in on the Hollywood legend. Would he lose his temper? Would he walk off the set after such a blistering personal attack? Producers held their breath, anticipating ratings gold, regardless of his reaction. But Stallone didn't move. His hands rested calmly on his knees. Slowly, he removed his reading glasses and set them aside. A subtle shift in his posture, straightening almost imperceptibly, was the only indication of his internal state. "Thank you for the opportunity to respond," Stallone finally said, his distinctive voice carrying the gravitas that had defined his most memorable roles. The studio fell completely silent, the tension almost palpable. "Congresswoman," he continued, addressing AOC directly, "I understand why attacking my films might seem like an easy political win, but there's something you should know before continuing down this path." "I don't need a lecture about fictional," AOC tried to interject, but Stallone raised his hand slightly. "Please," he said quietly. The studio fell silent again. Even AOC paused, uncharacteristically, yielding the floor. Something in his tone, not angry, not defensive, but carrying a weight of unspoken knowledge, commanded attention. "You came here today to score political points by attacking my character and my work," Stallone said, his voice measured but intense. "But while you've been giving speeches about veterans, I've spent the last 7 years working directly with them. Not for publicity, not for cameras, but because they needed someone who would actually listen." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving AOC's. "And what I've learned from them, Congresswoman, might surprise you." The audience erupted into whispers. What was Stallone about to reveal? "May I share something with you?" Stallone asked, reaching into his jacket. The host nodded, sensing a powerful television moment unfolding. "Congresswoman accused me of exploiting veterans," Stallone said, opening a worn leather notebook. "But I'd like you to meet Mike." The studio screens displayed a photograph of a young man in a wheelchair, his military uniform still crisp despite the obvious injuries that had claimed both his legs. "Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan. When I met him 3 years ago, he had been waiting 9 months for his first VA appointment." Gasps filled the studio. AOC's expression tightened. "Mike told me something I'll never forget," Stallone continued. He said, "Mr. Just Alone, your Rambo movies didn't make me join the Marines, but they helped me feel seen when I came home, and nobody wanted to look at my wheelchair." The camera caught Mike himself in the audience, nodding solemnly as tears streamed down his face. "You see, Congresswoman," Stallone continued, "while politicians debate theory, veterans like Mike live with reality, and their reality often contradicts the convenient narratives we create." AOC's confident expression wavered slightly. "And this is Sarah, Army Sergeant," Stallone continued, showing another photograph of a woman in combat fatigues, dust and determination etched on her face. "She saved 3 fellow soldiers during an ambush in Kandahar. Today, she works 2 jobs while fighting for benefits that were promised to her." The camera found Sarah in the audience, her chin held high despite the visible emotion in her eyes. "Sarah told me, the Rambo films didn't recruit me. Recruiters recruited me. Politicians sent me. But at least Rambo made some people actually care about what happened to us when we came home." As Stallone shared story after story of real veterans facing real struggles, the studio audience fell completely silent. His passion wasn't performative. It was raw and authentic, born from countless hours spent with these veterans, listening to their stories off camera, away from publicity. "This is James," Stallone continued, his voice taking on a sorrowful quality. "Navy corpsman, Vietnam. He came home to protesters calling him a baby killer. Today, at 76, he still fights for the health care he was promised." The screen showed an elderly man, proud yet visibly worn by decades of struggle. "James told me something that broke my heart," Stallone said. He said, "Your movies were the first time I felt like someone understood what we went through. Not the fighting, the coming home part." The camera found James in the audience wiping tears from his weathered face. "For the past 7 years," Stallone explained, "I've visited VA hospitals and veteran centers across America. Not for cameras, not for publicity, but to really understand their needs." He looked directly at AOC. "And what's interesting, Congresswoman, is that in all those conversations, not one veteran blamed Hollywood movies for their problems. They blamed a system that makes promises it doesn't keep." AOC gripped her armrest, her face reflecting growing discomfort as Stallone continued his powerful testimony. "You know what they told me they needed most?" Stallone asked. "Not revolutionary theories. Not systemic reimagining. They needed someone to answer their phone calls. They needed their claims processed. They needed medications approved. They needed transportation to appointments. He leaned back slightly. But the most surprising thing I've learned, Stallone said, reaching into his jacket again and removing several folded papers, comes from veterans in your own district. The host leaned forward. What do you mean, Mr. Stallone? Last month, I visited the VFW in Queens, Stallone explained. I do these visits regularly without cameras just to listen. And I was approached by several veterans who recognized me. They shared their stories, not about war, but about trying to get help from their elected representatives. He unfolded the papers carefully. These are copies of letters veterans there have sent to your office. Letters that have gone unanswered while you've been giving speeches about how much you care about veteran welfare. Gasps erupted across the studio. The control room producer frantically instructed camera operators to capture AOC's reaction as her expression shifted from confidence to visible concern. That's not possible, AOC stammered. My office responds to all constituent concerns. We have systems in place specifically for veteran outreach. Stallone placed the letters gently on the table between them. Maria Vasquez, your constituent from Queens. Her husband served in Iraq and suffered traumatic brain injury. She's written to your office 7 times about his denied benefits. She's still waiting for a response that isn't an automated email. The camera found Maria in the audience, nodding solemnly, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and validation. She told me, Stallone continued, my husband protected this country, but no one's protecting him now. I've called my congresswoman's office so many times they know my voice, but nothing happens. He picked up another letter. Robert Johnson, Marine Corps veteran in your district. He's been waiting 2 years for a decision on his disability claim. He contacted your office 4 times. The last time, your staff told him to check the website. The camera found Robert, a middle-aged man with a visible prosthetic hand, who nodded grimly. Robert told me, I didn't need a website. I needed someone to call the VA and find out why my file has been under review for 26 months while I can barely make rent. The audience sat in stunned silence. And perhaps most troubling, Stallone continued, his voice now carrying an edge of controlled anger, is Michael Williams, Navy veteran. When he reached out about his benefits appeal, your office transferred him 4 times and eventually directed him to a website. The same week, you posted 6 tweets about veteran care reform. The camera found Michael, an elderly African-American man who stood up proudly wearing his Navy cap as tears streamed down his face. Michael told me, I served this country face to face. Is it too much to ask for the same respect in return? AOC's face had drained of color, her usual confident demeanor completely evaporated. You accused me of exploiting veterans, Congresswoman, Stallone said quietly. But these men and women in your own district feel exploited by something far worse, by empty promises from politicians who use their suffering as talking points, but won't take the time to help them navigate the broken system you claim to want to fix. For 15 excruciating seconds, one of Congress's most vocal members found herself completely speechless on live television. The silence was deafening, broken only by a veteran in the audience who whispered loudly enough to be caught on microphone. He's telling the truth. When AOC finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual confident cadence. I wasn't aware of these specific constituent cases. My staff handles thousands of. With respect, Stallone interrupted firmly, these aren't specific cases. This is a pattern. These veterans don't need revolutionary theories. They need their calls returned. They need appointments scheduled. They need the benefits they've earned through their sacrifice. He gestured toward the audience. Ask the veterans in this room what they need most. Ask them if they care more about grand visions for systemic change or about getting their disability claim processed before they lose their home. Stallone stood and addressed the veterans in the audience directly. How many of you feel that what you need most is a revolutionary reimagining of the entire system? Not a single hand raised. The visual impact was stunning. Now, how many of you simply need the current system to fulfill its promises? To process claims promptly, provide quality health care, and offer the support you were guaranteed when you signed up to serve. Every veteran hand in the room shot up immediately, many standing as they raised their hands, creating a powerful visual testimony. The camera operator panned across the audience, capturing the powerful moment as the control room producer whispered, "Stay with this shot. This is incredible television. "You see, Congresswoman," Stallone said as he sat back down, "you came here to attack me personally, to score political points by suggesting I've exploited veterans. But the veterans I've met, including those in your district, don't feel exploited by my movies. They feel exploited by a political system that uses their suffering for talking points, but can't be bothered to return their phone calls." On social media, hashtags like hashtag Stallone's Veteran Truth and hashtag AOC Exposed began trending within minutes. Twitter erupted with comments from veterans sharing similar experiences. Facebook groups devoted to veteran issues were flooded with the clip, generating hundreds of thousands of shares in the first hour alone. A retired Marine watching from his home in Nebraska wiped tears from his eyes. "Finally," he whispered to his wife, "someone is actually calling out the hypocrisy." In living rooms across America, veterans and their families watched in stunned silence, many seeing their own struggles reflected in the stories Stallone shared. In VFW halls and American Legion posts, groups gathered around televisions, nodding in solemn agreement. Stallone looked directly at AOC. "Congresswoman, I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came here because veterans deserve better than to be used as political props while their actual needs go unaddressed." The studio fell completely silent. AOC's face had lost its earlier smugness. For perhaps the first time in her political career, the outspoken congresswoman seemed genuinely affected. "Politicians on both sides have failed our veterans," Stallone continued. "This isn't about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. These veterans upheld their end of the bargain. America must uphold hers." The camera caught a veteran in the audience wiping tears as he nodded in agreement. "You can attack my films all you want," Stallone said, his voice carrying a quiet power that filled the studio. "But while you've been talking about helping veterans, I've actually been sitting with them, listening to them, and doing what I can to help them, including those in your district who couldn't get a response from their own representative." In living rooms across America, viewers stared in stunned silence. Some wiped away tears. Others nodded in grim recognition of their own experiences with bureaucracy and unresponsive politicians. "Mr. Stallone," the host asked, sensing the powerful television moment unfolding, "what do you think should be done?" "Start with the basics," Stallone replied without hesitation. "Return phone calls. Process claims. Simplify the appeals process. Treat veterans with the same urgency and respect they showed when answering their country's call." He gestured toward AOC. The Congresswoman's passion for systemic change could be admirable, if it were matched with actual service to the veterans in her district. They don't need theoretical solutions tomorrow. They need real help today. For the remainder of the segment, AOC struggled to regain her footing. But the damage was done. Her attempted character assassination had backfired completely, exposing her own failure to serve the very constituents she claimed to champion. Within 30 minutes of the broadcast's conclusion, clips of the exchange had exploded across social media with millions of views flooding every platform. Cable news networks interrupted their regular programming to analyze the confrontation, with commentators calling it one of the most authentic moments in recent television history. Veterans organizations across the political spectrum released statements praising Stallone's advocacy. The American Legion National Commander stated, "Tonight, Mr. Stallone said what veterans have been saying for decades. We don't need rhetoric. We need results." In his small apartment in Queens, Michael Williams, one of the veterans whose letter Stallone had read, watched in stunned silence as his story reached millions. "He actually read my letter on national TV," he whispered, touching his television screen. "Someone finally heard me." His phone began ringing nonstop with calls from neighbors, fellow veterans, and eventually reporters seeking interviews. By morning, his story would be featured in the New York Post with the headline, "Forgotten Hero, Queens Veterans Struggle Exposed on National TV." Meanwhile, at AOC's district office, staff members worked through the night responding to a flood of calls and emails. The office voicemail filled within an hour of the broadcast, and social media accounts were inundated with comments from constituents demanding accountability. At VFW Post 914 in Queens, the same one Stallone had visited, veterans gathered for an impromptu meeting, many bringing copies of unanswered correspondence with AOC's office. Local news crews arrived shortly after, interviewing veterans about their experiences. "I've been trying to get help with my benefits appeal for 14 months, said one Vietnam veteran, holding up a folder of correspondence. "After tonight, maybe someone will finally listen." The next morning, something unprecedented happened. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office issued a statement. Last night's interview has prompted important reflection. I acknowledge the failures identified in serving veterans in my district and take full responsibility. Today, I will be meeting with the veterans mentioned by Mr. Stallone to address their specific needs and improve our constituent services for all veterans. But unlike typical political damage control, what followed suggested genuine remorse. That afternoon, AOC canceled a planned climate rally to instead visit the local VFW in her district. Without cameras or press releases, she spent hours listening to veterans describe their struggles with the very systems she had been critiquing from a theoretical perspective. She seemed different, said Post Commander Wilson after the meeting. Not the politician we see on TV. She actually listened more than she talked. In Washington, her staff was instructed to review every veteran-related communication received in the past year with priority follow-up on unresolved issues. 3 staff members were reassigned to focus exclusively on veteran constituent services. A week later, Stallone received a handwritten note from Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you for the difficult but necessary wake-up call. You were right. I was focused on the theory while neglecting the immediate needs of veterans in my own district. I would welcome your insights as we work to do better. Stallone responded with a personal call, and the two agreed to visit the Queens VA hospital together, away from cameras, to speak directly with veterans about their most pressing needs. The impact rippled beyond a single congressional district. Across the country, congressional offices reported increased attention to veteran constituent services. Several representatives established dedicated veteran response teams. Internal metrics for response times to veteran inquiries were implemented in dozens of offices. 3 months later, AOC co-sponsored the Veterans Benefits Improvement Act with bipartisan support. The bill included streamlined claims processing, simplified appeals procedures, and accountability measures for VA responsiveness. Most significantly, it included funding for local congressional offices to hire dedicated veteran service coordinators trained in navigating the complex VA system. At the press conference announcing the legislation, AOC stood alongside veterans from her district, including Maria, Robert, and Michael, whose stories Stallone had shared. This bill reflects what veterans have been telling us they need, she said, noticeably absent of her usual political rhetoric. Not what we think they need, but what they've actually told us. When asked by reporters what had changed her approach, AOC answered simply, "Sometimes the most revolutionary act is making existing promises work." The veterans I've met since that interview taught me that theory without action is just noise. The bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support and was signed into law 6 weeks later. At the signing ceremony, both Democratic and Republican sponsors credited the national conversation, sparked by the Stallone-AOC confrontation, with creating momentum for the legislation. Meanwhile, Stallone continued his work without fanfare. That evening, as he visited wounded warriors at Walter Reed Hospital, something he had done regularly for years without publicity, a young soldier said, "Mr. Stallone, after what you did on that show, you could be running for office. Instead, you're here with no cameras." "Why?" Stallone smiled. "Because this is where the real work happens. Not on TV or in speeches, but in rooms like this where real heroes are fighting real battles." And that perhaps was the most revolutionary act of all. The simple act of listening to the people who had given so much for their country. God bless you, and God bless America.